Hello and welcome to this video, and welcome to the interdimensional garden party. It's not my party, I'm just a guest at this party. The actual party is being put on by an incredible musician called YAAN ZEK. Now you're probably thinking, has Andy gone mad and what is going on? Well, what is going on is this. Last year I played on an album by the guitarist and composer YAAN ZEK. I have known Phi for nearly 20 years now. The album came out a few months ago, and we've been involved in, or I've been involved in, making a little documentary that explains this sort of creative process and some of the themes and ideas behind this album. And what I'm going to do today is you're going to get to see that documentary right now. I'm going to play it in a bit, but I thought I would introduce it to you and introduce you, for those of you who don't know, to who YAAN ZEK is. So let's go right back to the beginning. Back in 2006, I had a call from this guy with a very strange name, saying that he wanted me to drum on an album that he was making. That album was going to be called Anomalies. He'd asked Marco Minneman to do it, and Marco couldn't do it, and Marco had suggested my name. This was partly because Phi's compositions are very difficult to play on a number of levels, and Marco may well have overestimated my abilities, because once Phi sent me the tracks and the charts over, I realised I'd got my work cut out. This was intense on a number of different levels: statistically, mathematically dense, harmonically dense, arrangement dense, but also the requirements to shift genre, to shift approaches. You know, imagine trying to play a free jazz piece which is also interrupted by abrupt changes into very prescribed noise metal, you know, all these type of things. And I did my best to traverse my way through that album, and through that me and Phi became great friends, and we've worked over the years in a number of different scenarios. I've worked on alongside him as a teacher. I've had an avant-garde electronic improvising unit with the incredible Steve Lawson called Ley Lines, and we did 4 or 5, maybe 6 albums with that unit. And I've also played since then on a number of his albums. The thing I love about Phi's music is Phi's an incredible guitarist, he's an incredible composer, but he does something which I think really is the thing that makes me love music. It's the thing I was criticising about jazz. You know, there's some incredible artists out there today, there's some incredible technicians, but jazz has become, in my opinion, codified. It's become oh, my camera, I need to keep my camera over. It's, you know, it's become codified, it's become prescriptive, conservative. So you can express yourself, but you have to express yourself in the rules, right? And what that stops you from being able to do is create your own world. Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, for me, created their own worlds which I can inhabit, which are completely unlike anybody else's worlds. Bands like Frank Zappa, Captain Beefheart, Cardiacs, who else? Gong, who else would do this? Hawkwind to some extent. These artists create their own worlds that you can enter into. And Phi does this. For me, Phi sounds like the Cardiacs playing the music of John Barry in outer space and with an outside time. That's Phi's world. And within that, he sort of summons from the ether a whole host of characters. Aliens, Bigfoot, Victorian ghosts. All these characters are summoned up within. And his music is complex, but it's complex in a pointed way to tease out these emotions that are very specific, that are associated with these storylines and characters. And when I listen to Phi's stuff, it elicits a response that I often get when I listen to children's TV theme music from when I was very little. That's a feeling I find really hard to put into words. It's not happy, it's not sad, it's not exciting, it's something else. It's evocative. So I love Fire's stuff. I'm so happy to be able to play on his albums and get the chance to do the things he wants to do. He always asks me to do such strange things. There's things happening on this album that I just don't think you normally hear, where you have, you know, my drumming is almost like morphing from one time space to another and then back. All these strange things are happening. So I hope I've whetted your appetite. I get the views on here at the moment, it seems, for going and knocking new music, knocking the lack of creativity and stuff like that. I'm sure this will get less views, and that's the problem I'm trying to identify on this channel, is if I came on here and only talked about new creative music, it doesn't pique the algorithm, and so you won't see it, right? And it's really hard for artists that are doing something else and not just kowtowing to the wants, technical wants and generic wants of the audience that is out there. It's really hard to get new stuff out there. So I'm doing my best for you now, Fi, I'm doing my best. So I hope I've whetted your appetite. This is an incredible documentary with contributions not only from me, but from people like Mike Keneally, Bryan Beller, Challen Haspel, just a whole host of some of the greatest musicians on the planet at the moment. So I hope you enjoy it. So sit back, buckle in, get your space cake, and welcome to the interdimensional garden party.
The Interdimensional Garden Party is a real achievement for Fi. I mean, there's a real sense of maturity and refinement in his guitar playing, his compositions, and in particular his songwriting.
And it's just a magical album. It twinkles from start to finish. It's got that Fi magic, but it seems to be even like more focused and intense, and it's just wonderful.
It's always such a pleasure and a challenge to play his music, because it involves a lot of rhythms and unusual melodies and typical Fi ZEK. I mean, I love this stuff.
So when you hear his music, you know, you can hear the influences there. Some of them are conspicuous. You can hear Frank Zappa, you can hear Steve Vai, but there are some other more difficult to decipher influences there. You have to understand that Fi grew up during the 1970s and 80s, so he would have been exposed to all those popular culturalisms of the time, you know, film soundtracks and popular TV music themes.
It reminded me of when I was a teenager, actually, and listening to some of the progressive cornerstones of my life for the first time, and that feeling of discovery and wow, I can't believe what I'm hearing. That's the way this album hits me. So
because I think that's what Fi has done with these albums, especially in more recent times, rather than just being a guitarist, a composer that makes quirky, interesting guitar music. Over the last few albums, he has been forging his own existence. Right? He has created his a parallel Fi world that we can all now enter into. We all know what inhabits that world. It's a really interesting world to go into. So I feel on this album, you know, this world that Fi has built over the last, few albums. This is the invitation to that world for us all to go.
And I wanted to start things off with a brief yet intense explosion of energy. So you can think of it as the musical equivalent of standing under a waterfall. So if you can imagine that immense volume and torrent of water pounding down, and so replace water with sound, and you get an idea of what I was trying to evoke with this piece of music. On drums, there's the whirlpool of energy that is Morgan Ågren, the remarkable fluid bass playing of Steve Lawson, and longtime collaborator Lalle Larsson, exploding notes out of the keyboard.
He just told me to, just fill up every space and just do this sheets of sound kind of sound,
But also it's the kind of piece that's this brief sound effect in one way. it gives me the sort of potential to take this album into any direction. It gives that sense of anticipation of what's gonna come next. So this is the title track from the album and is basically another explosion, this time of color and vibrancy, and is an extension of the themes from the song Abigail's Place. So Abigail's Place came out in 2018 and was the sort of lead single from my double album Reality Is My Plaything. And if you watch the Abigail's Place video, you'll see a festive recreation of an interdimensional garden party going on.
Hello, I'm Ellie Williams. I'm a musician and singer. I think the first track we actually did my vocals on was the Interdimensional Garden Party. And that was really hard because it was kind of just straight in at the deep end. So it was tricky and it was very, very challenging, but it was good fun.
Superstar Christobal will here prevail. Superstar Chris, but he writes like a snail.
So our protagonist in this piece of music is Superstar Christobal. And Superstar Chris is locked in this battle with the Archdemon of Time, or Kronos, if you will. And Kronos sits on Chris's shoulder and sows seeds of doubt and despair as Chris attempts to write his magnum opus, his masterpiece, a book full of his knowledge and wisdom. So this whole piece of music is basically a creative exaggeration on those themes. So for a musical exaggeration, I needed to take a bombastic approach, specifically with the vocals, to create this epic sound to convey the dramatic or melodramatic themes going on in the song. So I had Ellie Williams and Rob Grokut helping out with additional layers in the verse and choruses, and basically we just did layers and layers of overdubs to create this huge bombastic vocal sound. The main inspiration for this piece musically was Kevin Gilbert's Shadow Self, and that's one of my all-time favorite pieces of music. So this is like a little homage to the genius and talent of Kevin Gilbert. In celebration of all things Bigfoot, so this piece needed to be big, heavy and bold, with massive riffs and massive drums and massive bass to kind of complement the idea of the Sasquatch stomping around in the forest. So a song about Bigfoot needs big riffs and big drums. So drummer Andy Edwards was at one point a member of Robert Plant's band, and you can imagine he's more than capable of delivering the kind of big, solid, heavy John Bonham style drum grooves that such a song as this requires.
This was the reason why I did the album. You know, when Fi rang me up and he said, "Do you want to play on the album?" I was like, "I don't know, Fi. I mean, what's the carrot that you're dangling? There's got to be a carrot that you need to dangle." And Fi dangled a very big Bigfoot-shaped carrot, and that he told me that I would be able to make a song with Bigfoot, who I'm a massive fan of, you know. And I thought, I really want to appear on an album with Bigfoot. I'll show you. I've got a few things here. I've got Bigfoot's book. You see, there's Bigfoot's book written by Bigfoot. We might have some photos of Bigfoot in here. Look, there's photographs of his big feet there. It's incredible.
And he's also joined on bass by his longtime friend and collaborator, John Jowett. So Andy and John have played together in many bands. They're currently in the band Rain and have played previously in Frost and IQ together. So having John there as well, complementing and locking into Andy, adds the perfect rhythm section to form the foundation for my wild guitar playing.
I've also got other books on Bigfoot. Here, I pulled another one out. SASQUATCH, The Legend Meets Science.
Strangest things can happen, strangest things can happen, strangest things can happen when the door is open.
This song, it's funny. It seems like half of it is like Phi's version of like a straight up pop rock song, which of course is never going to be the straight up version of a pop rock song. And the choruses are even kind of like a straight up rock tune. So it kind of maybe lulls you into a false sense of security there before it makes that very, very sharp left turn halfway through and goes into that long Odyssey section, which essentially carries it all the way to the end. There's a lot of harmonic complexity that's going on in the end of this song. And the bass is pedaling these bass notes, which, you kind of just have to trust the composer with something that's so harmonically complex. There's so much going on over top. And my job is just to be through it all. It's all kind of like slightly bent because it's not in the context of a traditional rock song or rock chorus. The context of it is this very, very strange tapestry, which is a big part of the thing that I think Phi is building in just about every one of his compositions.
This is the thing I love about Phi, is it's not the usual, some funky grooves, some nice odd time signatures, some tasty playing. Phi takes you into a world, and that world is a sort of, it can be at times a fairy folk world. It can be at times a sort of interstellar world. It can be a gothic world, populated with Victorian ghosts, with backstories which make your hair stand up on the back of your neck. And I think this is the territory that Phi's going in here, and it seems to be about some sort of erotic female spiritual presence. I haven't got a clue what it's about.
Yeah, Wickety Wickety. That's the song is about that kind of feeling.
The groove is kind of like a dark circus, like a circus from hell, but also feels like a little bit like a New Orleans funeral dirge, kind of just gone wrong or something.
If you were to meditate on this world that Phi's created, and you were to enter into that world guided by your spirit animal animus, right? I'm pretty sure if Phi was to do that, it would definitely be one of the pink elephants from Dumbo. Okay? That would be the doorway into the world. Anyone who's seen Dumbo will know exactly what I mean. And I think this track is like the doorway into that world and channels that world.
And so I used my Spectre Alex Webster signature bass, and I recorded a dirty channel, which I always do, and this is the Dark Glass Alpha Omega. So that's where that distortion that you hear in the bass, and Phi used a liberal amount of that, as it turns out, in the final mix. And that's kind of what propels the song through.
It's a style of music. The Elephants on Parade music is a style of music which has not been explored that much by the jazz, fusion and progressive rock world. I can't recall Alan Holdsworth or Scott Henderson or Guthrie Govan exploring that world, but here Phi does. And on this, Phi has allowed me to represent the interdimensionality of these parallel worlds through the use compositionally of metrically relatable opposing tempos.
The song's really divided into 4 quadrants. You know, you've got the first part, which establishes the groove, and then those melody breaks. And what happens is they keep coming back, but then suddenly they start coming at you from like all weird, unexpected angles. They're shorter, they're longer, they start on off beats. It's one of those things that, as a sideman, someone who's not the composer, obviously the composer knows how the song goes. But if you're hired to play the song as a session musician, to be able to do it in parts and then put it all together and then listen back to it at the end will help you make sense of the song, because there's a lot going on there. So then you get into the second part, where the groove stays the same, but the harmonic quality gets darker, where this melody starts going over top of it. And that gives the drummer the opportunity to do all sorts of metric modulations.
Right, so if you imagine a track is in this tempo, that's the speed of the track, and the track's travelling along at that speed, that's the world you're in. The tempo of the track is the fundamental determiner. It's the material in which that track exists. Every note, every phrase has to drop onto that grid of time, and that points towards the great mystery of music, which takes the spatial and channels the spatial along the temporal. Right, but within those tempos could exist parallel tempos, almost like parallel worlds, parallel universes. And most of the time in music, we're not aware they're there, but PHI allows me to explore those worlds. And it doesn't happen very often in a musical track, but on SASQUATCH, STOMP and WICKETY, I get to explore those worlds, and I feel that this is something that PHI and myself have done on a couple of other albums, but especially on this album, which is our own little unique contribution to the music world. You know, people like Frank Zappa and Cardiacs and other bands that we absolutely love, they've explored it, but not quite in the way that I think PHI and I have explored it, which is a sort of part improvisational and part structural.
And then the outro is like a jam on the main groove, which is like the whole song is kind of very controlled and very composed. And then for the end of it, I wanted to really loosen it up and kind of give it like a different kind of energy. And so I just kind of treated it like it was like a really, really bent blues shuffle.
This is one of 3 tracks that was recorded at Urchin Studios in London with the fabulous drummer Matt Ingram, and they formed the initial seed that sparked off the rest of this album. So May the Stars Shine Through You was instrumentally completed many years back, and it's just lying on a shelf there waiting for the right lyrics to arrive. So it took me a while and several different iterations to come up with the lyrical theme for this song.
The narrative to May the Stars Shine Through You is really interesting. I guess it reflects PHI's thoughts on society and technological advancements, our engagement with technology, how it modifies our behavior somewhat. And so there's a sense of despair, but also one of hope.
And I suppose the inspiration came from, I guess, me coming up with a neo-Gnostic alternative version of the Star Wars phrase or the Jedi greeting, may the Force be with you.
And out of all the songs on the album, I suppose it's the most conventional in terms of its structure. You know, there's a verse, chorus, and outro. But the chorus, you know, exhibits the usual twists and turns that you find in PHI's music. And there's a wonderful ending to this piece. It's really powerful and anthemic. Musically quite melancholic, but lyrically hopeful.
Flying Saucery was a lovely surprise for me. I have different methods of composing. Sometimes I just compose directly into Sibelius, the sort of scoring software that I use. Sometimes it's taking up the guitar and recording a bunch of riffs together. But with Flying Saucery, it was a case of I had some drums from Morgan, which I had some ideas for, but they weren't sort of set in stone. And so I basically composed a piece of music around these drums, trying different ideas out of what would fit with each section. And then I just had the idea of how about adding some vocals to really pull all this together. And when Ellie was here, we kind of went down this B-52's Rock Lobster kind of singing direction where she indulged all my crazy vocal ideas.
Flying Saucery was really hard because just the way the melody was moving for me, and also remembering all these words, which Vi had written, I think that morning, had just written them out on a sticky note, what he wanted me to do. I'd kind of just decided about 10 minutes before what I would be singing. So trying to learn that and also think of these melodies, there's so many different things going on, so you're never doing just one thing. It's never just kind of the same thing over and over. It's always something different to work with. So, and just a lot of fun.
Anomaly Temporal is totally a groove piece. It's about just getting a funky groove down and contrasting it with a B section that's a bit more cinematic and based around an augmented tonality. We have amazing funky drumming from Matt Ingram, Lally Larson playing electric piano on there, and then narration, the icing on the cake, the narration by Mike Keneallly, narrating a poem that I wrote. The basic song is based on this poem that was in itself inspired by an episode of the British sci-fi comedy series called Red Dwarf. And in particular, there's this famous episode called Backwards. And so, yeah, inspired by that, I wanted to write a poem that the second verse is the first verse backwards in terms of the word order, not phonetically. Otherwise it'd be even stranger, but I might try that one day. So the question that is on everybody's mind is, what is your favorite UFO? What is my favorite UFO? We all have our favorite UFOs. We should do, even if you haven't thought about it that much. So what is your favorite UFO? Is it secret military tech? Is it ET spacecraft? Is it cryptoterrestrial spacecraft? Is it ultra-terrestrial dimensional beings? Is it plasma creatures lurking in the upper atmosphere? Or is it just swamp gas or misidentification of the planet Venus? So these and many other questions are answered in this piece of music, maybe or maybe not.
My favorite UFO is achieved a real careful balance between, sweet lyrical melodies and hyperactive rhythmic activity. I don't know, it's really interesting contrasts there. I love the way it begins. It's a very pretty introduction, and Vi is obviously singing through a vocoder, so you get this robotic sounding voice that's followed by the most beautiful sounding female vocal melody line. There's some really interesting textural contrasts in the piece, and a great example of how Vi manages to take disparate elements and put them together.
Just when you think it's straight, or it just goes duh, 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 and then suddenly it's got all those weird chord changes where you go, let's go through this doorway, and then it's like super, super strange chords. And that gets you through the first two verses, and then it gets to this middle section, which is just really, really kind of wild. But it's wild, but also it's kind of whimsical, because I like the way that the chords kind of wind around until they get to the really weird part, the tritones, the dun 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 dun, and then it goes through a really kind of Zappa-esque through composed thing. But the chords over the 5/4 bit that lead into that I really like the way that they join, and I'm always, you know, when you're writing songs, whenever I hear unusual progressions that kind of like deliver an emotional message without relying on any of the usual chord trademark turnarounds or signposts, I think is very cool. And by the end of it, I mean, the thing is moving so fast, it's hard to believe that the whole band is sticking together. I don't know if I meant for that to kind of emulate, like, you know, the UFO is like taking off and like starting to like gain speed as it heads towards outer space or something like that.
It's just a fiesta, and hence it was my choice for the first video from this album. A kind of continuation of Abigail's Place and little UFO link in that video too.
We shot a video for that song, and hopefully you'll get to see some of the wacky goings-on of the characters who were responsible for pulling that whole thing off.
A great excuse to wear pajamas. So Floating brings the album down to a slower, calmer pace, and was a track originally recorded for the Reality Is My Plaything album. So it features Bryan Beller on bass, Marco Minneman on drums, and Mike Kenealy for the first guitar solo.
I mean, nobody sounds like Mike Kenealy when he's soloing, and it's this kind of like, all the ideas that he has just kind of come out of left field, and he's always hitting you with something that you don't expect.
So Floating never made it onto the Reality Is My Plaything album due to a technical glitch in the recorded drum tracks. Fortunately enough, I was able to rectify that issue for this album, and it's great that this piece finally sees the light of day, especially as I have lots of fond memories of recording it at Double Time Studios.
I had completely forgotten about this jam and this song from the sessions that we did in Double Time all those years ago. It came back to me slowly as I was listening to it. I just hadn't thought or heard about this piece of music that we did in over 10 years. I immediately recognized the sound of my old Mike Lowell Modern 5 red bass, which unfortunately was stolen in 2016. It's got this really kind of bright, aggressive, but also kind of beautiful upper mids and highs. And in the mix of the song, I'm realizing that that Phi really left a lot of that untouched, like really allowed a lot of that kind of color and character of the instrument to shine through.
I remember we did quite a number of takes of this piece, mainly to get the tempo right. I think initially we were playing it way too fast, and it didn't quite feel right until finally we settled into the right slow groove, which is quite a contrast to my other hectic, frenetic stuff.
The other cool thing about it is that I can hear the layers of Lally Larson's keyboard and Phi's extra guitar on there as the thing starts moving along. So it really kind of turns into something more than it originally was.
It was actually a live recording without any click or anything, because Marco and Bryan and Phi and Mike Kenealy had already recorded, and so I had to overdub the keys afterwards. And it was quite different, and it sounds very organic just because it doesn't have this click track, and I actually sometimes I prefer that, because then I can just listen to the drums and pretty much do a first take. That's usually the best, because then you listen and you're fresh. It's just like playing in a room, basically. You react to what you hear.
And to have it come back roaring through the speakers, you know, with all the energy and all the vibe of that time that we did it, you know, kind of all at once, is a super trippy experience. So, you know, I hope that people really dig it. I think this is one of the last artifacts of that little era there, that me and Marco and Mike Kenealy and Phi, when we were recording that in San Diego all those years ago.
I want to tell you about the puffball
Has your village ever been eaten by a giant puffball mushroom? Well, this can sometimes happen in these here parts of the UK. And this is a piece of music written about that very such occurrence. This piece, probably the oldest piece on the album, in the sense that it came out originally in 2007 on the Alchemist 2 guitar compilation album, which I also produced and mastered.
He asked me to play on a track called The Puffball That Ate My Village, which is a very interesting track. It was actually a little bit more quirky with its sort of hoppy, skippy beat, not the usual sort of rhythms you'd expect from guitar music or, say, progressive rock or jazz fusion. It was his own world. And little did I know I was actually entering into PHI's world at that point. And PHI has taken that very track and he has embellished it. He has expanded on it. He has mystified it. Or demystified it. I don't know which one he's done actually.
So taking the original drum parts from Andy Edwards, the piano parts from Lale, and my guitar parts, I was able to add some brass from Brian Corbett, and Steve Lawson added some new bass parts. So fortunately, Steve knew the song really well because he'd been part of the live band that had performed this track in concert. So he had the chops down to play it and did an amazing job, adding a solid foundation to the riff as well as following all the quirky rhythmic changes that happen in this piece.
So my contribution to the album was a guitar solo in the track The Puffball That Ate My Village. PHI invited me to play a solo on that. And it was a great opportunity because we had a chance to trade off solos, and it's kind of a call and response thing, I suppose. And it was just great to have a recording where we were both playing together. So I really enjoyed that experience.
And I'm very proud to being able to come in and put my drumming to that. Because so often we get bogged down, especially with instrumental music, in the technical. But great instrumental music is able to rise above the technical, and the way it rises above the technical is with the story.
Did I manage with the bars?
I remember the bars.
Regular, fuck, hit off and launch,